A young black doctor, defying direct orders, stepped forward in a packed hospital hallway to save a critically ill woman, dressed in a striking Gothic style, whom everyone else hesitated to even approach. Her courageous act almost cost her everything. Yet when the truth finally emerged, it didn't just transform the hospital. It reshaped the entire town. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The faint hum of fluorescent lights barely illuminated the somber corridors of East Bridge Community Hospital in Springfield, Missouri. The weary beige walls silently absorbed countless whispered prayers, hurried footsteps and heavy sighs. Outside, dusk gave way to night, a soft drizzle tracing trembling streaks on the windows, blurring the sharp edges of the world beyond. Inside a secluded triage room, Dr. Maya Collins adjusted her stethoscope, exhaling softly. The gentle creak of her well-worn leather shoes against the polished tile marked her quiet, graceful movements. Her deep brown skin held the soft sheen of a long shift, and her dark eyes, framed by short natural curls tucked beneath her cap, flickered with a determined exhaustion, the kind that spoke of struggles far beyond just hours worked. Tonight, as every night, Maya wasn't merely battling emergencies in the ER. She was in a race against an invisible clock, ticking away at her mother's life. Her modest paycheck barely made a dent in the relentless stack of hospital bills awaiting her at home. But Maya had never pursued wealth. She was here for a purpose deeply woven into her soul: to heal, to help, to honor the woman who had given her everything. A sharp click of high heels shattered her thoughts. Dr. Vanessa Grant, the head of emergency medicine, swept into the room, mid-40s, sharp-shouldered in a pristine white coat that seemed to challenge anyone to find a wrinkle. Vanessa's pale complexion almost glowed under the harsh lights, her narrow mouth, painted an unyielding crimson, tightened as her icy blue eyes fixed on Maya. Vanessa didn't speak immediately, she didn't need to. The way her gaze swept over Maya, impersonal, clinical, almost bored, spoke volumes. A heavy binder of policy documents clutched in her manicured hands seemed weighted, as if to undo the burden of the regulations Maya lived under. When she finally spoke, her voice was crisp, each word clipped clean as though even addressing Maya was a chore. "Dr. Collins," she began, arching a single, perfectly plucked eyebrow, "I trust you recall our protocols concerning patient admissions, especially walk-ins?" The pause before the final words lingered, deliberate and sharp. Maya stiffened, her lips pressing into a tight line. She kept her hands steady on the clipboard, though her knuckles whitened slightly. In that moment she felt the familiar slow burn, not of anger but of a quiet heartbreak. She knew that tone. She had endured it, fought it, risen above it. Yet here it was again, thinly veiled beneath the brittle formality of authority. "Of course, Dr. Grant," Maya replied, her voice low but steady, carrying a warmth that defied the chill between them. There was no sarcasm, no defiance, only a quiet grace born from years of being expected to apologize simply for being present. Vanessa's lips curved into something resembling a smile, but it never reached her eyes. "Good," she said lightly, already pivoting on her heel, the scent of expensive perfume trailing behind her like a ghost. Left alone in the sterile room, Maya slowly exhaled the breath she had been holding. Her mother's words drifted into her memory, soft as a caress: "Do what's right even when it costs you." Maya tucked the thought into the quietest corner of her heart as she turned back toward the corridor, unaware that within minutes, a decision would fall into her hands, one that would either affirm everything she believed in or cost her everything she had left. And so, under the heavy hum of hospital lights and the silent judgment of watching eyes, the story truly began. The night deepened, enveloping Eastbridge Community Hospital like a familiar, worn blanket. A thin mist clung to the edges of the parking lot, whispering against the faded lines as a battered sedan rolled to a halt by the emergency entrance. Through the rain-smeared glass doors, Maya glimpsed the car's occupants stepping out, and instantly the sterile calm of the lobby seemed to ripple. The first to enter was a tall man clad in heavy black boots. His attire was a deliberate chaos of leather, chains and dark fabric. Beside him, a woman leaned heavily on his arm, her slender figure nearly swallowed by a long black velvet coat. Her hair, dyed the color of spilled ink, clung wetly to her pale forehead. Beneath thick eyeliner and dark lipstick, her face was drawn tight with pain. This was a typical Goth style, their appearance immediately drawing attention. Conversations stuttered and stalled. A mother subtly pulled her child closer, casting a wary glance over her shoulder. A nurse at the front desk paused mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly before snapping back to her clipboard with unnecessary vigor. The atmosphere thickened, unspoken judgments hanging in the air like smoke. Maya registered the shift immediately, in the subtle tightening of shoulders, in the averted gazes. She felt it prickle against her own skin, a familiarity she knew too well. Her hand imperceptibly tightened around her clipboard, and she stepped forward, her expression carefully composed. The man approached the reception desk, his voice low but urgent, roughened by worry. "Please, my wife, she can barely stand. She needs help. Please." The nurse behind the counter, a woman in her 50s with a tight bun and an even tighter expression, barely glanced up. Her fingers tapped mechanically against the keyboard, each clack a beat of indifference. Without looking up, she muttered, "You'll need to fill out the intake form first. Sit down and wait your turn." The man's mouth opened to protest, but the woman at his side swayed dangerously. He caught her just in time, his arm wrapping around her thin waist to steady her. For a moment the hallway held its breath. From across the room Maya watched, the steady drumbeat of her heart quickening. She didn't need a chart or a clipboard to recognize what her instinct screamed. The woman was slipping fast. Her skin had the sickly pallor of someone dangerously dehydrated. The way she clutched her side spoke of more than passing pain. Time was not a luxury she had. Still, the nurse's voice, sharper now, rang out across the lobby. "You'll be seen when we can. Rules are rules." A few patients in the waiting area murmured in agreement, casting furtive, judgmental glances at the couple. Some shook their heads, the same old assumptions flashing across their faces. Assumptions Maya had seen stitched into too many stares, too many whispered comments in her own life. The man's knuckles whitened where he gripped the back of a chair, struggling to hold back the helpless rage clawing its way up his throat. His wife sagged heavier against him, a faint whimper escaping her lips. He looked around, wild-eyed, desperate, and found no allies. Maya's breath caught. Her mind raced, the rules she knew by heart pounding against the call of her conscience. She could hear Dr. Grant's voice already, cold, surgical, slicing through any defense Maya might muster if she acted without authorization. Protocol was everything in Eastbridge. Deviate and the consequences were swift and merciless. But then, like a soft brush against her heart, she heard her mother's voice again. Not loud, just certain. "You don't leave people behind, Maya. Not when you can help." The clipboard slipped from her fingers, forgotten. Maya strode across the room, each step slicing through the heavy fog of judgment that choked the air. "Sir," she said gently, her voice cutting cleanly through the noise. Her tone was warm but firm, carrying the authority of someone who meant every word. "Come with me." The man blinked in disbelief. "But," the lady said. Maya shook her head, offering a small, steady smile that reached her dark, kind eyes. "Come now." The nurse behind the counter straightened sharply, her mouth thinning to a furious line. "Dr. Collins," she barked, her voice sharp enough to crack glass, "you are not authorized." Maya turned slightly, just enough to meet the woman's gaze, not with defiance but with something stronger, an unshakable calm. "I am authorizing it," she said, each word delivered with the unwavering cadence of someone who had already made peace with the price. For a breathless moment no one moved. Then, ignoring the stares, ignoring the whispers that had already begun to hiss through the waiting room like snakes in the grass, Maya gently helped the man guide his wife down the hallway toward a gurney and a chance. Behind them, the hospital lobby simmered with silent disapproval. At the front desk, the nurse reached for the phone. A report would be made, no doubt. Rules had been broken tonight. Lines crossed. But Maya didn't look back. She had already crossed far more dangerous lines in her life to become who she was, and she knew some lines were meant to be crossed, especially when it meant saving a life. The hospital corridor swallowed them in dim light and muted sounds, the squeak of rubber saws and the low hum of machines filling the space between hurried steps. Maya guided the frail woman onto a gurney, her hands moving with the swift tenderness of practiced urgency. A nurse, one she didn't recognize, hovered at the edge of the hall, clearly uncertain whether to assist or to report. Maya offered no explanation, no apology. She moved with the assuredness of someone whose heart had already decided. Once the woman was stable and 4 drips secured and vitals monitored, Maya exhaled slowly. Beneath the fluorescent buzz, her dark skin gleamed with a fine sheen of effort. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, feeling the thrum of her pulse under her skin. But peace, as she had known too often, was fleeting. The sharp staccato of approaching heels announced what the silence already warned her of. She turned just in time to see Dr. Vanessa Grant rounding the corner, her white coat flaring behind her like the trailing flag of a displeased queen. Flanking her were 2 other senior staff, Dr. Lewis, a thin, balding man who always smiled a second too late, and Ms. Carter, the hospital's HR representative, whose presence rarely heralded anything but formal reprimand. Vanessa's face was a mask of tight-lipped fury barely held in check. Her hands, slender and polished, were clenched into tight fists at her sides. "Dr. Collins," she said, her voice slicing through the air with the cold precision of a scalpel. "My office now." Maya felt the weight of every eye in the hallway shift to her, heavy and searing. A young intern she often mentored, a pale girl with trembling hands, looked away, suddenly fascinated by a non-existent note in her chart. No one would meet her gaze. For a moment Maya's throat closed tight, her heart thudding painfully against her ribs, but she forced herself to lift her chin, smoothing the front of her scrubs with steady fingers, and followed Vanessa down the hall. The office was small and sterile, the windows shuttered against the night outside. Vanessa gestured sharply to the chair across from her desk without sitting herself. Maya remained standing. "You understand," Vanessa began, each word razor-thin, "that you directly violated emergency intake procedures. You endangered this facility's legal standing, exposed us to liability." Maya's hands curled into the fabric of her pockets. Her voice, when it came, was low but unshaking. "I saved her life." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "That is not the point," she hissed. "Protocol is the point. Chain of command is the point. You cannot pick and choose who deserves care based on your impulses." The unspoken accusation hung thick in the room, heavier than words. People like them. People like Maya. Something deep in Maya's chest twisted. Not in anger, she was long past anger, but in a bone-deep weariness that hurt more. Still, she refused to let it surface. She let her face remain still, her voice steady. "I acted because no one else would," she said simply. "And if you want to fire me for that, Dr. Grant, you can do it. But not before you look me in the eye and admit that letting her die was the easier choice for everyone else here tonight." For a fleeting second, something flickered across Vanessa's face, a crack in the perfect ice, but it was gone before Maya could be sure she had seen it. Behind her, Miss Carter cleared her throat awkwardly, shuffling the papers in her lap, waiting for the formalities of punishment. But the moment stretched taut and uncertain. Finally, Vanessa drew a breath through her nose, slow and sharp. "Pending further review, you are relieved from direct patient care," she said. "Effective immediately." Her voice was clinical, stripped of feeling. A final sentence passed. Maya nodded once, her movements controlled, dignified. She turned on her heel, each step out of the office a deliberate act of defiance, even as the corridor seemed to fold in on her like a closing hand. The walk back to the locker room was long and hollow. Along the way, familiar faces turned quickly away, pretending not to see her. Where there had been smiles, there was now a wall of polite silence, thicker and colder than any words of blame. Maya reached her locker, hands trembling slightly as she spun the combination. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal for a moment, closing her eyes. Her mother's face rose in her mind, tired, gentle, unbroken, and she clung to it like a shipwrecked soul clings to driftwood. She had done what was right, even if it cost her everything. In the lonely stillness of the room, Maya slowly unpinned her hospital badge and placed it on the bench. The clink of plastic against metal was loud in the emptiness. She sat down, folding her hands together in her lap, and let the silence settle around her. The battle was not over. It was only just beginning. The days that followed moved with a strange, disjointed rhythm, like an old clock missing every other tick. Maya kept her head down, confined to paperwork and shadowed corridors, a ghost haunting the very place where she once healed. Her hospital badge, stripped of access to patient floors, now hung heavily against her chest, an unwanted reminder. Most colleagues averted their eyes. A few nodded stiffly out of obligation. Dr. Lewis, always a man of careful neutrality, offered her a brittle smile one afternoon by the vending machines, but even that felt like a kindness measured out with teaspoons. Maya bore it all with a silence forged from long experience, from a life spent walking narrow paths where any wrong step could echo far beyond her own world. And yet, somewhere beyond the heavy walls of Eastbridge, the story had already slipped free. It began quietly, as such things often do. A whisper between two nurses, a late-night blog post from a grateful husband desperate to find a way to thank the nameless doctor who had defied rules to save his wife. The words, raw and trembling with gratitude, found their way onto a local community page, and from there scattered on the winds of the internet like seeds in a storm. By the time Maya caught wind of it, sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria with a lukewarm cup of coffee cooling between her palms, it was too late to stop. Patience. A kind-faced elderly man with a portable oxygen tank shuffled past her table and paused. His watery eyes, usually cast downward, lifted to meet hers with a tremulous kind of respect. He patted her shoulder once, clumsily, before continuing on without a word. Maya blinked, the simple gesture cracking something inside her chest she hadn't realized had gone brittle. Later that afternoon, the shift buzzed with rumors. A local radio host had picked up the story. A mystery doctor had broken protocol to save a dying woman when no one else would. No names were mentioned, but Eastbridge's staff were sharp enough to fill in the blanks. By the next morning, bouquets of dark red roses, heavy, almost Gothic in appearance, began arriving at the hospital's front desk. No notes, just signature black ribbons with the words, "Thank you for seeing us." The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyebrows and an even sharper tongue, sneered as she shoved the first vase toward Maya. "Looks like you made some interesting friends," she said, voice dripping with disdain. Maya accepted the flowers wordlessly, her face an unreadable mask, though inside, a swirl of emotions stirred. Pride, confusion, fear. She pressed her nose lightly to the blooms, inhaling their rich, earthy scent as if grounding herself. But not everyone shared the sentiment. Whispers turned uglier. Some said she had endangered the hospital's reputation. Others muttered about bringing in the wrong kind of crowd. The silent wall that had formed after her reprimand grew colder, taller. Maya felt the edges of it brushing her skin everywhere she went. Still, she endured just as she always had until the day the strangers came back. It was late afternoon when the rumble of motorcycles echoed through the parking lot. Not the polished growl of pristine bikes, but something heavier, more raw. A handful of figures clad in black leather and metal stepped through the hospital's front doors, their presence impossible to ignore. At their head stood the man Maya had helped, his dark clothing pressed but unapologetic, his eyes steady and clear. Beside him, his wife, looking stronger now, a fragile health restored, clutched a simple envelope in her hand. The hospital lobby froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Nurses stiffened behind their stations. Security radios crackled to life somewhere unseen. Maya rose slowly from the chart station where she was updating records, her pulse tapping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She met them halfway across the tiled floor, aware of every gaze boring into her back. The woman, whose name Maya would learn later was Elise, stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly but fierce with emotion. "You saved my life," Elise said, her fingers tightening on the envelope. "You didn't care how we looked. You just saw a person. No one else did." She pressed the envelope into Maya's hands, closing her fingers around it with surprising strength. Maya hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter handwritten in looping, careful script and a check. Maya's breath caught. It wasn't a donation. It was a lifeline, a substantial sum far more than she had ever dared hope for, meant to cover the surgery her mother so desperately needed. Maya lifted her eyes, stunned. The man, standing tall beside his wife, offered a small smile, solemn and sure. "Das Bunker Club," he said. "We heard about what you did. We're not many, but we take care of our own, and now you're one of ours too." From behind him, another figure stepped forward. A young woman with tattoos curling up her arms like vines, holding a neatly folded bundle of fabric. She placed it in Maya's hands with a kind of reverence. Unfolding it, Maya found a crisp new doctor's coat, not pristine white, but dyed a deep, stormy gray, with delicate silver embroidery along the cuffs, and across the heart in careful, beautiful stitching the words, "Guardian of Kindness." Tears blurred Maya's vision, thick and hot, but she held them back with a slow, shaking breath. She had stood alone. But she was not alone now. Behind her, for the first time, a few hospital staff, the ones who still remembered why they chose this work, began to step forward, tentative but real. The tide had begun to turn. The gray afternoon light pressed against the tall windows of Eastbridge Community Hospital, diffused by rain that trickled down the glass like slow-moving tears. The world outside blurred into shades of silver and blue. But inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. Word had spread faster than any memo, louder than any official report. First through local news, then radio, then viral stories on social media. The tale of the Guardian of Kindness had caught fire. Interviews were requested. Letters flooded in. Gifts appeared anonymously on the hospital steps. Baskets of fruit, hand-drawn cards, banners reading, "Thank you, Dr. Collins." For the first time in a long while, Eastbridge's sterile corridors hummed not just with routine, but with something warmer, more alive. Maya moved through it quietly, her steps careful, almost wary. Her dark skin glowed softly under the muted lights, her new coat, the deep gray marked with silver, a visible symbol of the battle she had fought without ever raising her voice. But not everyone celebrated. Behind closed doors, a different kind of conversation unfolded. In the executive conference room, Dr. Vanessa Grant sat stiffly at the long, polished table, flanked by the hospital's board of directors, men and women whose tailored suits and pressed smiles barely masked their unease. At the head of the table, Mr. Harold Whitmore, the hospital director, folded his hands carefully atop a stack of press clippings and faxes. An older man with steel-gray hair and a reputation for avoiding scandal at any cost, Harold's expression was grave. He cleared his throat, the sound slicing through the heavy silence. "We have a problem," he said bluntly. Vanessa's jaw tightened, her pristine nails digging crescent moons into the underside of the table. "I followed protocol," she said, her voice cold but defensive, her blue eyes flickering to the others for support. "She broke rank. She endangered us." Harold tapped a clipping with a blunt finger. The headline screamed in bold font, "Hero Doctor Shunned for Saving Life." "No," he said quietly. "You endangered us." The words dropped like stones into the center of the room, sending ripples through the assembled administrators. Harold leaned back, steepling his fingers. His voice, though even, left no room for argument. Public perception has shifted. Eastbridge can no longer be the hospital that punishes kindness. Not in this climate. Not when the entire city is watching. Vanessa paled, the faint color draining from her face. For a long, painful moment she said nothing. Harold continued, his tone final. "Effective immediately, Dr. Collins' privileges are to be fully restored. She is to be recognized publicly for her actions, and I strongly suggest you reconsider your leadership style, Dr. Grant, before it costs you more than your pride." The meeting dissolved with murmured acknowledgments, papers shuffled, chairs scraped back against tile. Vanessa remained seated long after the others had gone, her hands limp in her lap, her world quietly cracking at the edges. Meanwhile, unaware of the formal battles waging behind closed doors, Maya finished updating a patient's chart and tucked it into the file rack with steady hands. She had felt the change in the air but dared not trust it yet. It wasn't until a voice over the intercom called her name, "Dr. Maya Collins, please report to the main lobby," that she truly felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The walk there felt endless. Each step thudded in her chest, louder than the last. She rounded the corner and found herself blinking into a scene that stole the breath from her lungs. The lobby had been transformed. Balloons bobbed gently against the ceiling. A large banner stretched across the far wall, celebrating our Guardian of Kindness. Patients, staff, even visitors crowded the room, a sea of smiling faces. At the center stood Harold Whitmore himself, flanked by hospital executives and members of the Doss Bunker Club community, leather jackets, chains and all, standing proud and unapologetic in the heart of Eastbridge. Maya froze, her heart hammering, her throat tight with disbelief. Harold stepped forward, extending his hand. His smile was small but genuine. "Dr. Collins," he said, his voice carrying over the gathering, "today we honor you not just for saving a life, but for reminding all of us why we chose this calling to begin with." Applause erupted, wild, sustained, sincere. Tears blurred Maya's vision again, thick and unrelenting this time. She managed a nod, then another, pressing a hand lightly against her chest as if to steady the rush of emotion inside her. Among the crowd, Elise and her husband stood beaming, their eyes shining with pride. Maya drew in a slow, trembling breath and stepped forward, the silver-stitched coat swirling gently around her legs. Every step she took toward that podium was a step toward reclaiming not just her career, but her own quiet, stubborn faith that doing the right thing even when it costs everything was never a mistake. Somewhere deep inside she felt it, a warmth spreading, fierce and bright. He was not just seen now. He was believed. And sometimes the world does notice the ones who dare to be kind. The applause still echoed faintly in Maya's ears long after the crowd had dispersed, lingering like a tender memory in the hollow spaces of the hospital. She stood for a long moment in the center of the now quiet lobby, the faint scent of flowers and fresh balloons mingling with the sterile hospital air, grounding her somewhere between reality and a dream she never dared believe. Cradling the envelope against her chest, Maya turned and made her way toward the elevators, her steps slow, deliberate. The letter tucked inside, the one she had barely dared open, was more than a lifeline. It was a promise, a new beginning, and there was only one place she needed to be. The hospital wing for long-term care was quieter, softened by the hush of machines and the low murmur of televisions playing old sitcoms. The walls were warmer here, lined with framed photos of smiling patients and faded murals of blue skies and green hills. Maya paused outside room 214, her heart hammering against her ribs with a sweet, aching intensity. She brushed invisible wrinkles from her coat, the gray one her chosen armor, and pushed the door open. Inside, her mother lay propped against a mountain of pillows, her skin pale but her eyes sharp with life. The old woman turned at the sound of the door, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away from her face. A smile, slow and knowing, bloomed across her lips. "Baby," she said, her voice rough but full of pride, "I saw you on the news." Maya laughed softly, the sound breaking free like birds taking flight. She crossed the room in 2 quick strides and knelt by the bedside, pressing her forehead gently against her mother's frail hand. "Mama," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "we did it. We're going to get you that surgery. No more waiting. No more hoping." Her mother's fingers brushed through Maya's hair with a tenderness that carried the weight of every struggle, every prayer, every night spent wondering if they would ever see this day. Tears blurred Maya's vision, but this time she let them fall. Later that week, as golden morning light flooded the hospital corridors, Maya's mother was wheeled into surgery. Not as a woman fighting for scraps of mercy, but as someone fought for, cherished, lifted up by a community that had once turned its back but now stood unwaveringly behind them. And Maya, standing by the operating room doors, her silver-stitched coat catching the sunlight, understood something deeper than she ever had before. Kindness doesn't just heal the body, it heals the world. Months passed, and with them came a quiet transformation. The once stern hallways of East Bridge Hospital softened. Small changes first. A free clinic day once a month, organized with the help of volunteers from DOS Bunker Club. An outreach program for at-risk youth needing medical support. A new policy ensuring no patient would ever be turned away because of how they look. Maya, her heart full and her spirit steady, found herself standing at the center of it all, not with a megaphone or a raised fist, but with steady hands and an open heart. She became not just a healer, but a bridge between worlds most people never bothered to understand. On Saturdays, the hospital courtyard, once an overlooked patch of concrete, bloomed into a place of gathering. Members of the DOS Bunker Club, dressed in their leather and ink, mingled with elderly patients, laughing over chess games and potlucks. Children chased each other between folding chairs. Laughter stitched its way into the bricks of East Bridge, as indelible as any official decree. Maya often watched from a distance, her hands shoved into her coat pockets, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. She didn't need to be the center of attention. She had already received the only reward she ever wanted: to be seen, to be believed, to make the world, even one small corner of it, a little gentler. As she stood under the fading afternoon sun, Maya felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Elise and her husband holding a simple gift wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "For you," Elise said, her smile wide and bright. Inside was a small plaque hand-carved, the words etched deep. "Some acts of kindness can change the course of many lives." Maya ran her fingers over the letters, feeling the truth of them pulse beneath her skin. The world was far from perfect. It was messy and unfair and full of people who would always choose fear over faith. But it was also full of people like her mother, like Elise, like the unlikely family she had found among strangers. And sometimes, if you dared to act with love even when no one else would, the world answered back with a miracle. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily and forever.